Today officially marks the halfway point of this challenge, and the very last moment of peace I'll get before things get unhinged. After this build, I hand the steering wheel over to you guys. From here on out, every build will be dictated by your comments and the spinning wheel. And honestly, I might regret saying this, but I think it's going to be fun. No rerolls, no mercy, just pure unfiltered chaos. But for this build, I chose the block. I wanted to celebrate making it this far in a challenge that I personally viewed as impossible. So I doubled the working space and doubled the building time. I went with mossy stone bricks and used them to tackle something I've never done before, which is a castle. This build is definitely worth sticking around to the end for. To even begin tackling this honestly daunting task, I had to start simple. No details and no texturing were my focus, just blocking out the basic shape so I wouldn't completely overwhelm myself in 5 minutes. I was working from a couple of reference images seen here, but I wasn't copying them exactly. I wanted to pull specific elements from each so I wasn't building blind. From the start, I knew the walls couldn't be flat or clean. I wanted them to feel old, chipped, maybe uneven, and a little bit worn down and eroded by time. One of the references featured an English castle perched above a river, and that immediately stuck with me. There was something about the landscape doing half of the storytelling, so I decided to build the castle with the terrain in mind before just dropping it on top. I also knew that this thing had to feel imposing. A castle shouldn't feel polite. It stands atop a large plain and it should be looking down on people. So I built up these large watchtowers flanking the gate, towering over the approach and making it very clear that once you're down on that bridge, you're being watched. But I also knew a castle shouldn't feel lifeless. Even the most intimidating stronghold needs a hint of humanity. So I hung decorative banners across the gate as a subtle welcome. Not exactly friendly, but at least not enter at your own peril. Building the bridge though, that was humbling. It turns out I hadn't built a proper bridge in many years, which yes, is impressive for someone who claims to know what they're doing. The archers took a little bit of trial and error, tweaking and rebuilding until they finally stopped looking wrong and started feeling intentional. I then added some basic weathering to it before moving on to other structures. I didn't want this castle to feel cold or uninhabitable. Instead of an empty fortress, I imagined it as a stronghold for the weary, a place travelers might actually survive long enough to rest. So, inside the walls, I started adding these tavern-like buildings. They weren't just there for decoration, to break up the stone, but they were there to add warmth and help tell a story. Because to me, the best builds aren't just structures. They're places that feel like something has happened there and might happen again. So down in the comments below, what do you think happens in castles and strongholds like this? Do you think the taverns are filled every single night with a boisterous crowd, or do you think they're cold and subtle? I'd really appreciate all the storytelling you guys can come up with. With this being my last controlled build, I really wanted to do it justice. I didn't want to rush, and I definitely didn't want to play it safe. I wanted this to be a culmination of everything I have achieved and how far I've come during this YouTube hobby. I really wanted this to be my magnum opus for this part of the challenge. But with that pressure comes a lot of doubt. When I was building up certain parts of this structure, I was really thinking that it wouldn't work out in the end. Big builds like castles really struggle from proportion issues. If you get something wrong, the entire build can feel disjointed. And that's something that I had to work through when building this. I had to think about my details intentionally. If I had a jut out, I needed to understand why it was there and how big it needed to be, and that was something that I was unfamiliar with in the past. There is a multitude of small details that I would change about this build had I built it again, but these shelf windows are not that. I loved these and how they came together, and I am so glad I've finally updated to the latest version so I can finally use these. I added in the final details, forgot to press record again, and then it was on to staging. I knew from the moment I started building that I wanted a river, so I started building up the banks and then carving out this deep channel. I didn't really know how I wanted the bridge to go over it, if I wanted it to stop, if I wanted it to continue over. So for now, I just kept it very simplistic with the style that I was going for. I think if I was to redo this terrain, I would have the bridge continue over a lot more of it, instead of having it abruptly stop over the river. I think it looks a little bit disjointed, and once all the foliage and stuff is in, it really looks like this castle is abandoned, which it's not meant to be. Overall, I think I'm getting better at Axiom, but adding water into this river was a test of patience and of technique because it was a nightmare and I messed it up and had to clean it up and spend a long time just fixing it. But I think just like the reference, the river was really what told the major story of this build. It showed where the moss was beginning, it showed where the progression of the deterioration was happening, and with the forest around it, it really worked super nicely and is something that I'm super proud of. For my first entry into the castle genre, I think this one absolutely blew it out of the park, and I hope you guys enjoyed. If you did, leave a like, and if you want to comment, that would be much appreciated. I really love reading all your comments. But with that being said, please subscribe and stay tuned for the chaos that tomorrow is about to bring.